Oi, 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 YouTube. Welcome back to another video. Look, I've seen a lot of Twitter posts about the killer meta, the survivor meta, perks, 3-gen strategies, what's scummy, what's not scummy, what's broken, what's not. And I think today it's a very nuanced conversation that Twitter doesn't have enough characters for. So today we're talking about the current DBD meta, why it is, what it affects, how it seeps into other things in the game, and if there's really a solution. So look, if we're going to talk about the current meta, which would be Eruption, Call of Brine, and Overcharge for killer, and then a fourth perk like Deadlock or whatever you want to do, we need to talk about the old meta first. The old meta in Dead by Daylight really focused around 5 perks. It was Corrupt Intervention, Pop Goes the Weasel, Hex Ruin, and Jolt, and then Scourge Hook when Scourge Hook came out. Thrilling Tremors was really just a gen information perk, and then things like Thanatophobia and Dying Light have their uses on specific killers, but are not often super effective on most killers. So you would see Corrupt Intervention and Pop, you would see Hex Ruin and Pop, you would see Jolt with Corrupt. Sometimes you would just see all of them, right, in some cases, but that's what the old meta was. Now, when we look at regression perks that are not Hex Ruin, we see Jolt, Pop, and Scourge Hook. Now, what do those perks have in common? Those perks require that a killer gets a down or a hook for them to work or activate at all, period. The interesting part of that is it basically forces killers to already be moderately effective at the role that they're in, which is tough. In some cases, in a match, if you go against moderate solo queue survivors, you might easily get Pop Goes the Weasel or Jolt value fairly frequently, but if you play against a Swift who's playing safe, or if you play against smart solo queue survivors who are playing ultra safe, you may not get any usage out of those perks until 4 or 5 minutes into the game when you get your first down potentially, right? And so what that required is that you were a pretty skilled and efficient killer to some degree against your opponent to get access to your perks. Now that presents a very unique problem from a player onboarding standpoint and from a retention standpoint, right? If we look at Call of Brine and Overcharge specifically, those perks very much cater to newer players. While you do have to get Doc or Sadako to be able to unlock those, the Shrine of Secrets obviously allows access to those things as well. But Overcharge and Call of Brine do not require that you earn those perks. They simply require that you kick a generator, which means that if for some reason you see a gen that's at 45-50% and that initiates your first chase, you can kick that gen, get into your first chase, and in some cases that gen hits 0. The thing we see here is that you have effective slowdown without necessarily needing to earn it, and that buys space for killers that are not the effective, efficient killers that they were previously expected to sort of be to get any value, right? So the difference here is that we see the current meta with Brine and Overcharge really catering more towards players who are less effective at mind games, less effective at strategies like 3-gen strategies, or just less knowledgeable about where people would be, where people might spawn, all of these sorts of pieces of information. It is really, it seems like, designed to help new players and to keep new players interested, to buy them time so they can continue their killer player journey. The problem really comes in is when a killer uses these perks in tandem with things like Eruption, Deadlock, etc., and uses 3-gen strategies. So what we're kind of noticing is that if killers are smart, they're decent players, they're efficient, they're effective, and they're using 3 to 4 slowdown perks, and they're 3-genning, that most solo queue survivors are suffocated out of a match. And this may kind of indicate that the stats we've seen from Behavior Interactive regarding kill rates might be due to these new perks coming out, to the effectiveness of these new perks, because you don't have to earn them necessarily anymore. You can just buy yourself enough time to get a snowball rolling. And so I understand the criticism regarding the Call of Brine, the Overcharge, the Eruption being so painful, especially against a smart killer, and especially in solo queue. I think there is some conversation around 3-genning that we need to be careful about. I think to use a 3-gen strategy isn't a mindless tactic. I don't think that it is something that killers should be put on blast for employing. Now, do I think a killer can just hover 3 gens from the start of the match and just never chase and never commit to chase and never hook? No, I don't I can't recall a time where a killer ever really got away with that per se. Obviously solo queue is different, and survivors that feed it might, present a unique problem. But I don't think that is as quite easy as a lot of people present it to be. I think if you are presenting 3-gen strategy as being quite that simple, then I think you maybe need to play more killer, but I'd love to be shown otherwise. So if you guys have examples, let me know. Now, I think a lot of killers may say that they run slowdown perks because there are so many progression perks, because there's Prove Thyself, Overzealous, because there is Potential Energy, Fast Track, all of these perks that could be used, on top of the fact that survivors can nullify killers' natural slowdown capabilities, right? If you think about playing the killer role, every single killer has natural slowdown, enforcing survivors to have to heal each other. But with things like Will Make It and Circle of Healing, survivors can circumnavigate this a little bit, become more independent while their teammates take care of generators while, they can heal themselves. So I think at the end of the day, if we're thinking about, okay, why do killers run slowdown? It's not necessarily because of all these perks. I think if we removed Circle of Healing, I think if we removed Prove Thyself and Overzealous and Fast Track and all of these perks, we would still see the potential for survivors to do gens fairly quickly. I think we would still see a lot of cases where a fairly organized solo queue team, Swift teams, whatever, could still do 2 to 3 gens within the first 3 to 4 minutes. And I think that is kind of a bit of a problem. The problem is there's no solution for that, right? We see killers like Pinhead and Pig really excel because they can really force survivors to do a secondary objective. But can we bake a secondary objective into the game to make gens naturally slower? I don't think we can. The idea of like maybe survivors have to go search through a chest to then get parts to then repair the generator. Maybe they have to do that 2-step process, gives killer more time, and then we just nerf all the killer slowdown perks. I mean, you could do that. There's potential for that, but the more complex you make the natural game, the less new players will want to engage with it, and then of course the more difficult the game will be for solo queue players, and especially new solo queue players, people that get lost easily, don't know where the toolboxes or chests are, don't know then to go to the gen, can't find the gens. Like, we find that that's going to be even more frustrating. So is there a clear way to fix any of this? Not necessarily. I'm not going to lie to you. The amount of times I play Survivor and I go against a killer that has 3 slowdowns and they still lose, it's not low. It's not a low number. Or the amount of times that we get like a 2 or a 1-man escape and they're running 4 slowdowns. I think at the end of the day, no matter what we're going to see, if the perks aren't meta, if there's a mechanic that gets reintroduced, if something happens that changes, we're still going to see these rampant complaints. There's going to be a flavor of the day Twitter drama sort of moment. And I think we really should start gearing ourselves to having more constructive conversations around these things, why they exist and what they affect, instead of just throwing mud at Survivor players and throwing mud at killer players. I think if you are just blaming killers or just blaming survivors, I think you are missing the larger point. When we sit and break things down, why would people 3-gen? 3-gen's a good strategy. It groups survivors up, because if they are spread out, you will lose. It forces them to artificially group up without you camping or tunneling. Okay, so why would somebody run multiple slowdown? Because maybe they don't know about the 3-gen strategy, or because even when they try to 3-gen, they're not doing it right. Maybe people want to do both because they want to win, right? And maybe people are complaining about that because they also want to win. Right? I think if we can talk about why survivors are running speed up perks, well, because solo queue can sometimes be a nightmare, or because they expect 4 slowdowns, and people run slowdown perks because they expect the progression perks. Like, it is a back and forth, and slinging mud back and forth at each other doesn't solve anything. There's nothing there for you in terms of progress. Your idea is not the only idea, and I guarantee it's not the right idea per se. I think we really should be having more discussions instead of trying to prove more points. Why do things exist a certain way? My experience is not going to be your experience. If you truly want my experience, I try to run 1, maybe 2 slowdown perks in a game. I played at MMR that if I don't 3-gen really hard and play very effectively, those games don't typically go very well. They might be a 2K, sometimes a 3K. But at the same time, if I get a team of survivors that are solo queue and they make tons of mistakes, well, then of course I 4K. And that's the variability of Dead by Daylight, right? That's kind of the problem. A lot of stuff has been implemented to help new players be new players, but it doesn't scale up very well. A lot of stuff scales in a way that, okay, well, if you get moderately not great survivors, you can run 1 or 2 slowdown, right? But if you get pretty decent survivors most of the time that hold W very well and they're very smart, then okay, your chases are just going to be longer, and you'll need a little bit more slowdown because that's just how the game functions. Both of those scenarios are true. You can play against moderate to fine survivors and not need slowdown perks, and you can also play against really good players and wish you had 3 slowdown perks. Both can be true, and they are true in some scenarios. Let's admit that and have constructive conversations about 3-gen strategies, about meta perks, and what happens next. What do you guys think? Of course, let us know down below. I'll be praying to the entity to see you guys in the next bootcamp video tomorrow.